All right, if we take a look at the title of the lecture again, loops, branches, random numbers, and arrays, we're going to talk about all of those, all right? The first thing let's try to wrap our head around is what is an array. I know some of you have a background and know what that is already, but even if you do, make sure you pay close attention because arrays in JavaScript are a little bit different than they are in Java. And if you're new to this, then you'll definitely be wanting to focus on what this is all about. So let's take a quick look here in our JavaScript file. And let's just imagine that we needed to keep track of a whole bunch of names or something like usernames that are being input into the system, into the computer. Well, right now, with the knowledge you guys have in JavaScript, you might think something like, var user1 equals Bob. And by the way, I would not type this if I were you, because I'm going to delete it in just a second. Var user2 equals Jim. Var user3 equals Jim Bob. Var, that's hilarious, guys, equals Bob Jim. Var user 5 equals Mary Margaret. And var user 6 equals Margaret Mary. Come on, my jokes are hilarious, man. Okay, guess not. All right, I'm putting a laugh track in, that's it. Okay, so this is a list of 6 names here that we have that we want to keep track of, right? And then maybe for some reason we need to print these out in an alert box. And so now suddenly we have to do this, right? Alert, user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? We have to, whoa, what just happened there? Right, so that's kind of, if I told you to store 6 usernames, that my guess is you do something like that, right? Does everybody see that? So let's run that, make sure that really does do what we think. And there it says Bob, and then Jim, and Jim Bob, and Bob Jim, and Mary Margaret, and Margaret Mary. Okay, so they're all there. Okay. Now, can you see, though, how this could quickly get out of control? What if we're dealing with 100 users, right? Suddenly I have, that. I mean, that'd just be insane, it'd be a mess. That's where arrays come in handy, right? Arrays have many, many uses, but this is just one simple example. So what's an array? That's the first question I want to ask. In the human world, when we talk about the word array, forget about programming, what does that mean? Give me a sentence that uses the word array. That's not a sentence that uses the word array. In the human world, give me a sentence that uses the word array. Yeah.
There was a wide array of birds at the aviary.
Yes, there was a wide array of birds at the aviary. Very good. So what does that mean?
Kind of like a selection.
Yeah, large collection, list, group. Now that goes back to Sabbath's definition, right? It's a list of things, right? And so that's basically what's happening here. So here's how we would make an array that would hold all of this. So what we can actually do is make a single variable called user, and it holds multiple values. So we can have a variable called user that holds Bob, Jim, Jim, Bob, all these guys, right? So I'm going to back up here and delete some of this stuff to transform this into what an array might look like. Okay, so here we go, comma. Oh, missed a semicolon there. And a comma here. And here. Here. All right, so we're going to call this array user. And this is the syntax for creating an array in JavaScript. The end. Now what we have is an array called user. Okay? And it holds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 names. Okay? So the question now becomes, well, how do I get my hands on any one of those specific ones? If I just say, alert user, what's that going to do? That puts the whole thing there, right? Well, that's not what I want. I want to just print out Bob or Jim or something like that, right? So here's how this works. In the computer world, we always start our numbering with 0. We don't start with 1, right? So what happens here behind the scenes, secretly in the JavaScript world, these have been assigned a number. Bob has been assigned the number 0. Jim has been assigned the number 1. Jim, Bob, 2. This is 3. That's 4. That's 5. Okay? And every array is like that. The very first thing in the array will be number 0, and it'll just increment by 1. So those numbers are what we call the array index. All right? And so Bob's index is 0. And Bob is referred to as the 0th element in the array. Okay? He's the 0th element. So these each have their own number here. I'll just kind of see if I can stick a number underneath there. And that's number 1. That's 2. That's 3, 4, and 5. And I'll just put a comment there so that sort of keeps those in check there, like that. Okay? So now, anytime I want to access Bob or Jim Bob or whatever, all I have to do is call their specific number in brackets. So if I wanted to print out Bob Jim, that would be user 3, because Jim is the 3rd element. Okay? So if I run that, there it is, Bob Jim. Okay? So if I wanted to get my hands on Jim Bob, it's number 2. And there's Jim Bob. All right, so conceptually, particularly those who don't have a programming background, does that idea make sense? We okay with that? Any questions about that? Okay. All right, next step. Now that we have this array and we've got some values in it, this can make things much more efficient when it comes to printing out the information in the array. So the other day we talked about this idea of a for loop, right? So let's go into a little bit more depth about what a for loop does. So let me create this the syntax. Sorry, my brain locked up there. What I want to show you is, if you ever used BASIC programming language, which was a language that's been around for like 50 years, this is the first language I ever learned. I'm going to show you the syntax for BASIC, not because it's useful now, but because it helps clarify what a for loop does. So back in the day, if I wanted to loop through the number 1 through 10 or something like that, I would say for x equals 1 to 10. That's the syntax from the programming language called BASIC. Okay, this does not work in any modern language that I know of. Maybe it does, but I don't know of any. So this is not good code, so don't copy that. But the reason I point that out is because it was very clear what's happening, right? I'm taking this variable x and I'm going to change its value from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 all the way up to 10. Well, the new for loop syntax for most modern languages looks like this. We start off by creating a variable that's going to be our counter. So I was always using x back in the day, right? So variable x is equal to 0. I'm starting at 0 rather than 1. And then the next thing is the condition that allows me to continue looping. As long as x is less than 6 in this case. Why 6? Because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things I want to loop through. As long as x is less than 6, let's continue looping. And then we're going to increment x every time we run the loop, all right? And we'll walk through how this code works in a second. And then something will happen here. Run some code and run other code and run even more code, right? So here's what happens, guys. Now, even if you have a background in programming and you know about for loops, pay attention to this, because this is something that a lot of programmers don't actually know how this works. So when this line 4 runs, or line 6 runs right here, the very first thing that happens is this line of code right here runs. Once this happens, this line of code runs and it's done. Next up, this line runs immediately after that var x equals 0. And it asks the question, is x less than 6? Well, at the moment, what's x's value? It's 0. So is x less than 6? Yep. So since it's less than 6, run everything in the curly braces. Once everything in the curly braces runs, then we increment x. Increment x. Right there. So now x is equal to what? 1. So then it's going to go from here to here and ask, is x less than 6? Yes, it is. Therefore, run this code. Then it increments it. Now x is equal to 2. Is x less than 6? Yes, run this code. Increment it. X is now 3. Is x less than 6? Yeah, run this code. X is now 4. Is it less than 6? Yeah, run this code. See how my mouse is moving here? In a circle. We're in a loop, right? This is a for loop. It's going to keep doing that. Now, let's say at the moment x is 5, right? We're on the iteration where x is 5. It just incremented to 5. We ask the question, is x less than 6? Yes. Run this code. Now we increment x to be equal to 6. Is x less than 6? It is not, so it does not run this code that time. So it will stop at 6. It'll increment to 6 and then stop in this particular case. All right. So does everybody understand conceptually what's going on with that loop? Does that make sense? Okay. So let me scroll back down so we have those numbers laid out there. Now, this is useful because if I want to, inside of my code here, I can say alert user X. Right? If I do that, the first time through the loop, what's going to happen? It's going to grab user 0. Next time through the loop, it's going to grab user 1, and then user 2, and 3, and so forth. So when I run this right here, there's Bob, Jim, Jim Bob, Bob Jim, Mary Margaret, Margaret Mary. I should have had Joe Jack. That's a guy from King of the Hill. All right. So how do we feel about that idea? Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay. Next thing, if we understand how arrays are working, we feel okay about that and why they can be useful. Let's talk about what happens if I add an element to the array. Well, I'm going to shorten these names a little bit so I have a little bit of space here. So just have Mary and Manny and Mo and Jack, okay? And we'll get rid of these numbers here since I think you guys get that idea. Now, what's cool about this, if I was doing the way it is on line 4, where I had a different variable, well, not that, when I had this before, remember that? And I had a different variable for every one of them. Well, if I added a new user, I'd have to make a new variable. If I add another new user, I have to make another new variable. Well, with this method, we do not have to do that. If I add one more thing here to Harcrest, that's a fancy name. Just made that up right now. If you decide to name one of your kids that, I have trademark rights on that. Anyway. So now what I've done, I've added one element to this array. So now if I just change this number to 7, that's all I have to do, and I can run it, and it'll loop through every single one of those. And here we go. And there is the last one. All right? So it's very easy this becomes more flexible, right? It's even more flexible than that. I'm going to show you that part in a minute, and programmers probably know where I'm going here in a second. But do you see why that can be very useful, right? If I just want to add another name, it's very easy to do that. Now, what's nice about this, built into the JavaScript language, all arrays have a property called length, all right? So if I go over here to the console for just a moment, and I click on the console, the array that we made is called user, right? So if I type user.length, it tells me how many elements are in it. There's 7, right there. Now if I go in here and I add another name, Jeeves, okay, and then I'm going to refresh, get rid of all these okays here, and I type user.length again. Now it tells me there's 8 items in there. So user.length is a nice property to know about because it tells us how big the array is. Why is that useful?
If you're having people make accounts and the array just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, then you can set it to call length so that your loops could.
Yeah, so instead of saying that while x is less than 7, I can just say less than user length, right? I think that's what you're kind of getting at, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. Yeah, so now anytime that I add to this array up here, I don't have to change any of my code. And why is that useful? Well, because maybe this array was built by the users themselves, like they were giving the user input. And so I don't know how big the array is going to be, right? So if I add more names here, and we'll do our go-to Beavis here, and we can now, when I run this, it will alert out every one of those. Now, I'm going to show you a different way to do output other than alert. I'm going to use the console.log method here. So if I type console.log, this will actually print to that console rather than an alert box. So it makes it a little bit easier for testing. So we're going to say user X, like that. Now if I run this, refresh the page, did I typo something? Something did not work. Let's run it again. Okay, maybe I just need to open the console. Maybe that's my problem. Yeah, I just didn't have it open. All right, there we go. So now, instead of it making alert boxes, right, it just prints it over here on the right to the console. Okay, so if I clear the console, run it again, you can see that it prints all those names there. And if I add another name to the list, refresh the page, it adds Butthead to the list, okay? So it just, this, I don't ever have to change this code ever again, all right? So I think that's pretty good evidence that, you know, arrays and loops are kind of useful, right? All right, what questions do we have? Feeling okay? Yeah.
Can you change the size of the array since it's been made?
Yeah, that, I only get that question from Java programmers. Yeah, yes. So, yeah, the question is, can you change the size of the array after it's been created? Yes, you can. Yeah, there's the restrictions with arrays that you have in Java do not exist in JavaScript. In fact, for all my Java folks, I'm going to blow your mind right now. That's totally legal. And so is that. That's a character.
How do you know?
And, oh, I don't know, let's go false. And,
That's making me really uncomfortable.
and I know, yeah,
Why don't you speak Java like this?
2.9.
Like, what's the advantage?
That is a question for another day when we have time to debate that. Yeah, that's a big question. Okay, so now this array is it's holding two strings followed by an integer, followed by two more strings, followed by a character, followed by a string, followed by a boolean, followed by a string, followed by a floating point number. That's totally legitimate, okay? If I run this, you can see it prints those out, no problem. Not only that, but it also, it does treat this like an actual number, okay? It's not treating it like a string. So if I were to say, if if X is equal to, so Bob's 0, Jim is 1, 2 is 2, I'm gonna change it to 5. So that's the second element, the number 2 element, right? If it's equal to 2, I'm gonna say console.log user X plus 7. Okay, otherwise do this. So the reason I'm doing this is just to show you, if it thought that the number 5 was a string, what would 5 plus 7 be? It would. What would it be if it thought it was a string, though? It'd be 57, right? It'd be 5 concatenated with 7. But if it's a number, it will be 12. 5 plus 7 will be 12, right? And we'll see that actually we'll treat it like a number, see, 12, okay? If that were in quotes, then it would be a string, right? And if I were to run that now, then we would get 5, 7 because the 5 was a string, okay? But not in quotes, that makes it an integer. All right, so any questions about that? So for those who have a Java background, this can be confusing and tricky, okay? All right, how do we feel about arrays in general? Okay, let's take a look at our the lottery game assignment here. So step one, we're supposed to ask the user how many numbers they want. Okay, step two, we're going to create an array that holds that many numbers. Step three, we're going to create that many random numbers, and then we're going to display the final output in this kind of format right here. Okay, so here's what this might look like. Let me just go to a live version of one. Okay, how long should my lottery number be? It should be 5 numbers. And then it spits out 5 random numbers. Okay, this is from a student from a past semester. So if I run it again and I say I want, 20 lottery numbers, it'll spit out randomly generated 20 numbers, and they're separated by a dash. That's the program you guys are going to create right there, okay? Now, obviously you need to style it your own way and make it your own thing, but that's the basic idea of the program. So I guess that means we need to figure out how the heck to generate random numbers, right? How do we get some random numbers? In the Java world, there's a class that you guys just use called random. We don't have that. We're going to do a different thing here. So let me run this program again, get it back open in the browser. Okay, so let's go into the console again. Clear the console. And there is built into JavaScript a class called math. There's also one in Java with the same name. But math, if I type in math.random, this is actually a method, a function that's part of the math class. And when I type that, it generates a random number. See that? So if I type it, it generates a random number, okay? Oops. Notice the number. What's its range? What do you think the range probably is?
0 to 1.
Yeah, it's 0 to 1. Well, we're supposed to generate a random number from 1 to 99. So this isn't quite what we're looking for, is it? So how could I generate a number? Let me clear the console again. How could I generate a number that's between 1 and 99? What could I do mathematically to this? What's that?
You would
Add what?
or
If I added 99, then every number would be 99 point something, right?
times 10,
If I multiply by 10, then what do I get?
you get 10, or depending what that is.
I'd get numbers between 1 and 10. I'll multiply by 100. There we go. Multiply by 100. And now we get some number. Now it's still a decimal, but we'll deal with that in a minute. But I'm getting some number that's between 1 and 100. Okay? All right, let's figure out how to deal with that floating point problem. Clear the console. I'm right-clicking. Clear the console. All right. So that's generating a decimal. Okay, let's go back to our algebra days, math days, and maybe in linear algebra, maybe, I'm not sure which class you would have learned this. The first one I'm going to show you, this is grade school math, right? So if I were to round the number 5.4, what does that round to? 5. What is rounding 5.49 round to? Also 5, yes. What if I round 5.51? What does that round to? 6, right? So this is rounding. This is stuff you learned probably in like 8th grade or whatever. When you take a number, if you're going to round it up or down, when you're rounding it, it's based on the decimal point. If it's 0.5 or up, you round up. If it's below 0.5, you round down. That's rounding. Okay. Well, there's also a function in math, and again, this is math, not programming, called ceiling, and there's another one called floor. These are mathematical functions. If I run ceiling of 5.1, anybody know what that returns? 6. If I run ceiling of that's still 6. Okay? Ceiling just literally means round up, right? No matter what the number is, round up. Okay, floor, 5.99999, it rounds down. or you could say it truncates in the case of floor, but it's the same result. So those are actual mathematical functions. Just so happens though, because in programming we often need math, built into the JavaScript library, you can access a ceiling function and floor function. It's actually called ceil in Java, okay? JavaScript, sorry. Okay, so let's look at what that might do. If I said math.ceil and I pass it in the number 5.0001, it's going to round up to 6. If I say math.floor and I pass it in like 7.9999, it's going to round down to 7. All right? So if that's the case, I could apply one of those functions to my random number and it'll get rid of the decimal point, right? So if I said math.ceil and inside of math.ceil I put that should generate a random whole number. Does everybody understand that? Anybody confused by that syntax? Feel okay about that? Oh, typo. What's that? Oh, mail. I said mail instead of math. Thank you. There we go. So it randomly generated 15. And that time it randomly generated 7, or 57, and then 7. Let's try another one here. Copy that. All right? Keeps generating random numbers. Okay. So that looks good so far, but I want to make sure that it's generating the proper range. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. This is just a silly way for me to test it. This is not any, formal thing, but it's just a way we can get in here and play around. So I'm going to get rid of that. That's there. And we're going to get rid of this right here. Okay. So let's start our own new thing here. All right. So what I want to do is I want to create a variable that's called random, and it's equal to that. All right. I want to loop, well, let's start by, yeah, we'll leave that. So what I want to do is I want to loop through that random variable, or I want to make a loop that's going to make that random number like 100 times, or 1,000 times, or 10,000 times. And I want to check to see if I ever get a number that's out of range. All right? So, again, this is just sort of an anecdotal test, but I'm going to do a for loop. And now down here I used X. You can literally use whatever you want for your counter. The standard convention, though, is typically to use the letter I, which often people refer to it as being I for incrementer. So I'm going to go with I. I equals 0. What's that? Oh, that too. You hear a lot of different things. So I is less than, we'll say 1,000. We're going to loop 1,000 times, increment. And so inside of there, I'm going to create a random number, and I'm going to print it to the console. Or system.out, man. I was about to do a Java thing. Console.log. Random. I'm going to spit out that random number. Okay, let's start there. All right, let's go ahead and run it. And what's my typo? No, that's good. Unexpected token on line 2. Oh, there's a period right there. Look at that. Huh? Good catch. Okay, so let's go back to the console here. All right, so now what I'm doing here, first of all, sometimes when you're taking this random number and I'm sealing it or I'm flooring it, sometimes it gets a little confusing in your head. Does that mean that I'll never get a number 100, right? Should I floor it? Does that mean is that gonna put me under 0? So what I'm looking for, I'm scrolling through here and see if I see 100. And I think I just saw one. Yeah, right there, there's 100. So that means it will reach 100 as a possible number. So what I want to do now is just roughly test if it will go below 0 or below 1. And I'll show you how we're going to do that. Notice, I want to show you this. See how next to that 2, there's also a 2? All that means is that the number 2 was randomly generated twice. We should see that more than one time here. So let's clear the console here and run this. And like the number 54 was generated twice, the number 34 was generated twice, right? Okay, so what I want to do now, and this code here is just me showing you a way that you can prove to yourself that things are working properly, okay? So what I'm going to do is get the random number, and then if random is less than 1, or random is greater than 100, then I want to print out an error saying that that's out of range or something like that. So I'm going to say alert out of range. In fact, I want to, not only that, I'm going to say random is out of range, right? So it'll say 12 is out of range or whatever the number would be, right? Otherwise, I'm just going to print it to the console, right? Or I'm going to print it to the console anyway, no matter what. So doing that, theoretically, I should get no alert boxes, right? Again, this is just me testing my code. Okay, this is just me testing to see what's going to happen. All right, so let's run that. And we got no alert pop-ups, right? So let me show you what would have happened if I said greater than 99. Then anytime the number 100 came up, I'd get a little warning. And 100 out of range, right? But 100 out of range. So it's twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 times the number 100 was generated. And that's out of range because of what I said in there. Okay. But now we know that it's in range, right? We know that we're getting a number between 1 and 100. I mean, after running it 1,000 times, right? Maybe that's not enough tests. Maybe we run it 10,000 times or 100,000 times. So I'm going to run it 100,000 times real quick. And you'll see it'll take a moment to do this. Okay, so numbers are showing up on the right, but it's still spinning up here on in the overhead. But theoretically, after that 100,000 times, if I never get a number outside of that range, I can convince myself that we got a number between 1 and 100. Make sense? Okay, so it's almost done here. And we're done. No errors. Okay. So all this code here was meant to do was just to prove to me, to myself, that yes, this really is generating a number between 1 and 100. That's it. Make sense? Now the instructions, however, say generate a number between 1 and 99. So how would I fix that? What could I do to make it between 1 and 99? This is the participation part.
Multiply it by 99.
Yeah, multiply this by 99 instead of 100. Yeah, and that's it. Now I'll generate a random number between 1 and 99. Okay, I'm not going to run it again. But so let's just remember this. We'll come back to that in a minute. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, so we're good with this random number generator here. Now let's move on to the next piece. We're just sort of baby step kind of piecemealing this thing together here. So I'm going to kill all this code for the moment, and we're going to write some new code that's going to have that in it in just a moment. So ask the user how many numbers they want to pick. Okay, let's do that. If I wanted to get user input, what do I do? A prompt, right? Now you can do it with a form on the web page. We haven't learned how to do that yet. We're going to learn that later. But so for now, we'll just use a prompt. If I want to assign the value the user puts in the prompt to a variable, what's the first thing I should type here? Var, then whatever, like number or count or something like that, right? Equals prompt. How many lotto picks? So they're going to enter some number, 5, 10, 20, whatever, right? Okay. Once they do that, so that's step one, done. Ask the user how many numbers they want. Next, we're going to create an array that will hold those numbers. Yeah.
Isn't that going to convert it into a string because it's starting out as a string?
Yes.
How do we turn that into an int? 'Cause when
Baby steps.
we- sorry.
Step one, ask the user how many numbers they want to pick. Okay, so they enter the number, 5 or 10 or whatever, right? Next up, create an array that will hold the numbers they made, all right? So let's just create an array here. And now this is different syntax for JavaScript than what you would do in Java. If I want to create an array that's going to hold some lottery numbers, I'll call it var lotto or whatever equals that. There, I just created an array. That's it. Okay, that's an empty array that has no values. Notice I didn't say how many values I'm going to put in it. Okay, in Java, you'd have to be specific. JavaScript, you do not. I can start off by saying that there's nothing in it. As long as I put the variable name equals brackets, then that's an array, and I can add elements to it as much as I like, okay? All right, so now, so I've created an array. Next, create that many random numbers between 1 and 99. What's that many numbers? Yeah, it's this right here. So I need to create num number of random numbers, right? So we're going to do a loop, and this is part of the requirements of the assignment. Int I is equal to 0, while I is less than what? How many times am I going to loop? Yeah, I'm going to loop num times. Okay? And I plus plus. Okay? Keep in mind, I am recording this, so I'm more interested in you understanding it than copying the code. So make sure that you understand it, because when you write your own version of it, I don't want it to look like my code. Okay? Okay, so now I've created a loop here, and I'm supposed to, inside of this loop, assign random numbers to this lottery array. So I basically need to say that lotto I, right, equals a random number, right? So lotto I, the first time through the loop, it'll be lotto 0. So the 0th element will be that random number right there. And then the next time it'll be, the first element will be a new random number. And the second element will be a new random number, and it'll keep doing that until we have num numbers of random numbers inside of our array. That make sense? Any questions about that code? I'm going to run it and show you what's happening here, but do we understand the code? We feel okay? All right, so let's run it. And, number 5. Oh, I did, man, that's Java code there. Sorry, guys. Did that last class too. Okay, how many lotto picks? I want 5. Okay, now I just added 5 random numbers to an array called lotto. And to prove that, if I type lotto, there's the array right there. And you can see in parentheses it says 5. Those are the 5 random numbers. If I refresh this, and let's say I want 10 random numbers this time, and I type lotto, those are the 10 random numbers it created. If I run it again and I say 1,000 lotto, that's going to scroll off the screen forever, but that'll be 1,000 random numbers there, okay? Let's click on it and see if it'll let me see them. Nope. It's hoping to let me see them all. But you get the idea, right? So we've just randomly added num number, and let's just use the word x here because that's how we sort of speak in algebra. We just added X number of random numbers to this lottery array. Does everybody follow that? Okay, any questions about that? We good? All right, now that we've got this random array here, that's an array that's filled with random numbers, I should say, let's look at the next step. The next step is I need to display the final output in the HTML document, okay? I'm going to display it in the console, but I want you to display it in the web page, right, when you build yours. So let's think through this now. Those of you who have a programming background, you're probably thinking, well, I could do this thing that you're about to do, Jeff, with one loop, okay? I forbid you to do that. I want you to do it in 2 loops because I want you to practice creating the loops, all right? So I want 2 loops, and I'll be looking for that in your code. So loop number 1, what the heck is that? Creates or let's say fills the array, right? The lotto array. Loop number 2 is going to display the lotto array. All right? So if I'm going to display the lottery array, I need to loop through the lottery array, right? So how do I loop through the lottery array? For loop. Variable I equals 0. Now, I is less than what? Lotto. What is it? Lotto.length, right? I could also here, rather than lotto.length, because I am looping through the lotto array, but I can also just do x, right? Because x is the same length as the lotto array because the user told me it was x, right? All right, so either way is fine. So what's going to happen in here? That's the part we need to figure out. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I just remembered I wanted to go back to your question a minute ago, Sabbath. The user put in the number 5 or whatever for x, and here I am using it like it's a number.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what's happening here. This is what happens when you have what's called an untyped or a loosely typed language. And that has what that means. Java is a strictly typed language. You have to declare what type of data everything is. You have to tell the compiler, this is the data I'm using. JavaScript, you do not. You can use whatever data you want, and JavaScript is smart enough to figure out what you meant. Okay? So the default is a prompt is a string. And if I were to do a string plus another string, it will concatenate rather than mathematically add them. We saw that a few minutes ago. And so if I tried to do some sort of x plus something, that's what would happen. However, it's looking for context clues, and the context here is I'm in a for loop where I'm comparing integers. Oh, he probably wants x to be treated as a number,
If it's,
and it just figures it out.
if it can't be parsed into an int, does it just return an error?
Yeah, we'd get an error. So if I said something like, if I ran this and it said, how many lotto picks do you want? And I said, J, then, and I try to look at the lotto array, it's empty, right? Because what happened here is I less than J? Basically is what's being said, right? And J is saying, oh, maybe J is a variable I don't know about. And as far as I know, it's not less, I don't know, it just doesn't know what to do. So it doesn't create the array, it doesn't run the loop, okay? But when it's actually a number, it knows how to handle that. So, sorry, I didn't mean to ignore the question, I just spaced it for a minute. Okay, so moving back to this now, if I want to print out something that looks like, let's just go in here. Something that looks like, some lottery number, some other number, right? That's what I want the output to look like, but those X's are lotto numbers. Let's think about how we would do that. I can't just alert the numbers out in the array, right? Because if I do, it's going to alert them one at a time. So I need to somehow build a string that's going to have all of that in it. Does that make sense? Okay? I'm getting a blank stare.
Lincoln got it.
What's that?
Lincoln got it.
Okay, just want to make sure. So what I want to do is I want to take the 0th lottery number in the array plus a dash plus the first number plus a dash plus the second number plus a dash, right? So I want to do something like this. I want to have a variable here that holds lotto picks, and it's going to start off as an empty string. And then I'm going to say lotto picks equals lotto picks. So it equals itself, lotto, plus whatever lotto I is. Okay, does that make sense? So it's going to say, grab this, start off with that, and add to it whatever you already have, which at the moment is just that. Then add to that the ith element, right, which will be 0, then 1, then 2, and so on and so forth. But don't stop there. Tack on to the end of that a dash. All right? Now, there's going to be one little problem here. What's the particular programmers, you probably see this. What's the problem that I'm going to have with line 14? Yeah, at the very end, I'll have an extra dash, right? So we'll look at that. We'll deal with that in a minute. So now what I've done, though, I've got this lotto pick here, and I've built a string that is going to have the lotto numbers separated by dashes. So let's take a look at what's happening here before we run the code, okay? So let's start off by thinking through this loop here. Variable I equals 0. So we just created a variable called 0. Now this stuff on line 16 and below is not code. This is notes that I'm typing for you guys, okay? So we start off on line 12, variable I equals 0. And I'm saying loop through the length of the lotto array. All right, let's say it's got 3 random numbers in it, okay? So it's going to loop 3 times. First off, is I less than 3? Yes. Okay, then do this. Okay, well this is saying take the lotto picks, I'm just going to call it LP for short. Take the lotto picks, add to it whatever lotto is at I, lotto I. What's lotto I? It's lotto 0, right? So it's saying add lotto 0 plus add a dash. All right, let's just make up what's in this array. Let's just imagine for a moment that in the array, the 0th element is 99, the first element is 25, and the second element is 12, okay? So what this line says here is go get what LP already is. Well, what is LP to start with? It's quotes, right? It's nothing. So take that, so I'm saying take blank quotes plus the 0th element, which is 99, plus a dash. Take all of that and assign it to lotto picks. So take all of that and assign it to lotto picks, okay? So now lotto picks is equal to this, or LP, because to keep consistent here, is equal to 99 dash. That's what lotto picks equals first time through the loop. All right, make sense? So first time through the loop, that's what lotto pick equals, lotto picks. Now we increment I. So now I is equal to 1. Everybody follow? So I is equal to 1. Next line says, okay, take whatever lotto pick is. So it's saying to do this. Except since I is equal to 1, it's saying to do that with the first element. So what that's really saying is take lotto pick, which at the moment is this now. That's what lotto pick is equal to at the moment. So take that plus the first element, 25, plus a dash. So when all is said and done, and we loop through this, at the end of this, lotto pick, we're saying take all of this and assign it to lotto picks. So lotto picks is LP is 99 dash 25 dash. Make sense? All right, one more time, okay? After we do that, which was this line of code here, increment I again. So now we say I is equal to 2. Okay, and again, this stuff down here is not code. This is just me walking through what's happening. And then, of course, it says to do this, because 2 is less than 3. And this is saying to the second element. Well, now it's saying take whatever LP is. Well, what's LP at the moment? It's this now. That's what LP is at the moment. Take that, add to it whatever lotto 2 is. Well, that's 12. 12 plus add a dash. Okay? And take all of that, right? Take all of that and assign it to LP. So now LP is equal to 99-25-12 dash. And that's the end of the loop, right? Because now it's going to increment I to equal 3. and it's gonna ask the question, is 3 less than 3? And the answer will be no, so the loop will stop. But when this loop is done running, that's the value of lotto picks right there. Just this value right here of lotto picks. Does everybody understand the logic and the flow of that? Okay, any questions about that? All right, so now, oh yeah.
So is it not, so when we were watching, when you were going through this, changing lotto picks from 99 and you add the 25 to it, it's adding that 25 that's a number, it's just putting it as a string?
Yes.
It's so, okay,
Yep.
okay.
Yep. Yeah. Because it's looking at the context, right? It sees that I started off right here. This is the kind of the equivalent of me saying that lotto picks is a string by saying its starting value is nothing. So the moment I say quotes plus 99, it goes, oh, he's trying to concatenate this onto that string. JavaScript just figures it out. In fact, if I have an actual integer number and I say to concatenate on a string, like any kind of a quote, it'll basically convert that number to a string. So it can get confusing, right? Because JavaScript just figures out the data type and does it. All right, so when we're done looping through this, we now have a brand new value for lotto picks, right? And that brand new value in this fake made up scenario is that number right there, that string. So let me shrink that up. I'm gonna leave that on the screen and I'm gonna comment it all out. But that way you'll be able to see it in the video if you want to kind of analyze it and think through it. Okay? But when all is said and done, lotto picks has some value at the end of the day, right? So if I just alert that value, lotto picks, it's going to alert, in fact, let's not alert, let's do it console.log. Console.log that value. It's going to print out something that looks like this if I were to enter 3 as my number of picks, right? So if I refresh it and I say 3, see it printed something in that form there, right? Different random numbers than what I made up a second ago, but that's the idea. All right, does that make sense? Now we got to deal with that extra dash. We'll talk about that in a second. But I want to make sure that this is absolutely clear of what's going on here, okay? And so let's back up for just a second and talk about what we've looked at in JavaScript so far. Day 1 was me, and day 2 really, I was just kind of throwing a lot of stuff at you, right? Exposing you to variables. I roughly went through what a loop does, what an if statement does, and all this stuff, right? We kind of just overview talked about those things. Not expecting a lot of it to stick, but at least planting some seeds. Day 3, which was the other day, we did our first real use of if statements, right? We did that, the thing with the Europe code and all that, where we changed the Europe website. That was our first real use of if statements, and we introduced how to tie into putting JavaScript into your HTML, which is the real reason we care about JavaScript in our world, right? So now we're taking real examples of loops, and we're applying them in a real world scenario, okay? So we're gonna slowly build on these things. The next thing we're gonna look at in a couple days will be getting into the document object model, the DOM in detail, where we do a much more advanced program that's going to take user input from a form. We're going to process it. It's going to be a guessing game where we have to guess what the computer's thinking, and it's going to let us know we got the right answer or the wrong answer. So it's going to be a pretty hefty program, and it's going to take all these principles together. So I want to make sure as we're stepping through this that all this makes sense. The random number makes sense. The for loop makes sense. The concatenation inside the for loop makes sense. All of that stuff. Okay, how do we feel? Any questions about anything? Okay, if you got one, just stop me. We'll talk about it. So let's just see if we can figure out any thoughts, particularly from the non-programmers here, without even thinking about the code, just kind of what do we need to do here to deal with that extra dash? Just thinking in human terms. What do we need to do to deal with that extra dash? So where is it being added? It's being added every time we loop through. But I don't want to add it every time we loop through, right? There's one particular time we loop through that I don't want to add it. When is that one time? When it's the last time, right? The last time through the loop, I don't want to add it, okay? So I could do an if statement, right? So basically the if statement is, if this is the last time, don't do it. Well, how do I check for if this is the last time, right? That's the question. But that's the idea. Conceptually, if this is the last loop, don't do this, just do this. Follow? Okay, so we'll look at how to do that in a second. The last thing I want to show you before we get to that is this syntax here, lotto pix equals lotto pix plus that. There's a shortcut. We talked about this when we looked at our operators the other day. And that is this, plus equals, right? That's the same thing. So I'm going to leave that there. In fact, I'm going to put them both there. Okay, plus equals. So I'll say, let's put this one first. And I'll say the code below is the same conceptually as the line above. Okay? So we'll just comment that one out and won't use it. But now you've got it there so you can understand it. Okay? And you can see this in the video. All right, so this is the new thing. Let's just make sure we didn't break anything. Run it, put in 3 numbers, and yeah, it looks good. Okay. So now, let's deal with that little thing here. So I want to do an if statement that says if this is the last time through, right? Then I want to do one thing. Otherwise, I want to do another thing. Okay, and by the way, this is how I write code in the real world all the time. I'll write an if statement with a real sentence in there that says, if this is the last time through, until I figure out how do I figure out what that is, right? That's just a little note for me until I figure out how to actually write that code. So this code, once we figure out what this is, right, what goes here?
Same line of code minus the.
Yeah, so it's just this, right? Just this piece right here. That's it. So if it's the last time through, don't put the dash on. If it's not the last time through, put the dash on. Now, there are 1,000 ways to do what I'm doing right now. In fact, in the other class, I did it a different way, okay? But there's 1,000 different ways to do this. As a Java programmer, if you've got, or any kind of a programmer, you may come up with a different way. You might try doing it with the ternary operator, right? Which might be a cleaner way to do it. There's lots of ways to do it. If you don't know what a ternary operator is, ignore that I just said that, okay? But there's lots of ways to do this. We're gonna do this because it's an easy way to think through it, all right? So how do we know this is the last time through? We have to look at the value of I, right? If it's the first time through, what's I's value? 0. And let's imagine a scenario where the number entered by the user is 3 again, okay? The first time through is 0. What's the second time through?
1.
What's the last time through? It's 2, right? It's not 3. 3 is what they entered, but 2 is the last time through. So I can't just say if I is equal to 2, though. I can't do that, right? Because they might enter the number 10. Then I'd have to say, well, I equals 9, right? You can't do that. So what do we do?
Lotto.length.
Yep, lotto.length minus 1, right? So if I is equal to whatever number the user put in minus 1, or I could also say x minus 1 because that's the same number in this particular context because x is what the user put in, right? Either of those will work, all right? So let's try it. Run it, put in 3, and there we go. Worked. Okay, let's refresh it and put in 10, and there we have 10 numbers, okay? I'm going to show you another way to do this that maybe is a little easier to think through, okay? And this is typically how I solve this problem. So here's one way to do it, okay? That's one way. I'm going to comment this. In fact, I'm going to delete this code since you can just pause the video and look at it. So I'm going to give it a second for you to pause here if you happen to be watching the video live or recorded later. So I'm going to delete all this. I'm just going to copy this piece right here. So this goes goodbye. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this, but instead of saying lotto pix plus the dash, I'm going to say dash plus the lotto picks. The reason I'm doing that is because it's a little more clearer if it's your first time through the loop than if it's your last time through the loop. So in this scenario, I want to not do this if it's my first time through the loop, right? So if I is equal to 0, right, that's the first time through the loop, then I want to do just this. Follow? Otherwise, I want to do this. Okay? That's the same thing, but what's nice about this is I don't have this weird lotto length -1 business, which can be confusing, especially if you're new to programming. So this is a way to solve it. And the reason I'm showing you both methods is because A, in programming, there really are, seemingly an infinite number of ways to solve a problem, number one. But number two, I want to show you how you can think through this logically and figure out a way around it. Something that makes more sense to your own brain, right? But this should give us the exact same results. So I'm going to put in 15 lotto picks, and there it is, right? Let's run it again and do 5. There we go. And those are random numbers each time. If I run 5 again, I'll get 5 different random numbers. Okay? It's weird, I got 271s. If you want to challenge yourself, make it to where your array can't have duplicates. That would be a fun little challenge for yourself. I'm not going to require that, but you could do that as a challenge. Okay, all those pieces we've just looked at is everything you need to know to build your lotto program. All right, so let's take a look at the instructions one last time. Ask the user how many numbers they want. That's a prompt. Create the array. We did that right here. Create the array called lotto. Create that many random numbers that are between 1 and 99. So that's what's going on here, and we're filling the array. Okay. Delete this out of here. Okay. So we filled the array right here. And then the next thing says display the final output in that format. Okay. For how many numbers they entered. That's this chunk right here. And then well, that's creating the variable that you're going to display right here. Okay. That's it. I mean, this is the whole program right here. That's it. Now, obviously, this piece for you guys is going to be in printing it out to your HTML, right, using our famous document.getElementById method that we learned the other day. Okay, but this is it. This is just extra stuff that I was explaining to you. I'm going to delete that. This is the program. Okay, it's pretty simple overall. So, any questions about that? Okay, I'm going to throw one last thing in here that if you don't like what you're about to see, that's okay. You can ignore it. But in most modern languages that use the curly brace syntax, if the stuff in the curly braces is only one line, you don't need the curly braces. Okay? So this right here is legitimate. That's the same thing. I don't even have to indent it. I'm just doing that because I want to. In fact, that's legitimate. And that's actually how I would have written this. That's how I write code all the time. Not only that, but this if-else statement is actually one statement. That's one line of code, even though I have it on 2 lines. An if-else is one thing of code. And so that means that my for loop only has one line of code as well. That's totally legitimate. And in fact, I would probably, believe it or not, do that. That's how I write code, guys. I know that's a lot of people that makes me cringe. If you don't like that, that's okay. You don't have to do it that way. But I do that all the time. This is totally legitimate. As we run it, you'll see. Oops, wrong one. 10 numbers, and it works just fine. Okay, that's totally fine. Now I can see the argument for wanting to maybe do that, so it's a little cleaner and easier to read. But what I like about that is it makes the program look really small and simple. Right? There's not a whole lot to it. 12 lines of code, plus 3 of them are comments. So you're going to build this program following the instructions here for file structure and make sure that you look at the rubric and go the extra mile in the JavaScript, in the CSS, make it look nice, make it, see if you can think of a way to add some extra functionality. Like I said, maybe make your array not be able to hold duplicates. That'd be a fun thing to challenge yourself with, okay? Any questions? You got a week and a half basically to get this one done. I think that's a reasonable amount of time. It's a pretty straightforward program, okay? Going once, twice.